From Demetrius Holloway surviving a Miami setup and sending a feared crew to recover his diamonds, to Frank Matthews beating a Mafia ripoff and vanishing with 20 million, these 7 drug lords survived moments that should have ended them, but survival only bought them time, because nearly every empire still came crashing down. Demetrius Holloway, the man who sent killers to collect a necklace. Before Detroit learned the name Big Meech, the city already had one, and he wore double-breasted suits instead of track suits. Demetrius Holloway ran a 4-year stretch from 1986 to 1990 that put him among the biggest cocaine dealers in America, and by the accounts of the men who watched it happen, among the largest black cocaine dealers the country had produced. The arithmetic explains why. According to Courtney Brown Jr., who sat close enough to know the numbers, Holloway at his peak took delivery of 1,000 kilos a month in Indianapolis and moved that product into Detroit. His ticket only covered around 640 bricks out of every 1,000, which meant a third of each load was profit before he sold an ounce. He did not build that connection alone. Brown knew the details because his own father partnered with Eddie Jackson, and the two of them were the biggest heroin dealers in Detroit through the 1970s. Jackson sat in prison in the early 80s alongside a young Holloway, locked up for breaking into train freight cars, took a liking to the kid, and plugged him into heavy Colombian connections. When Holloway hit the streets in 1985, that endorsement turned him into a whale overnight. Jackson had already shown the city what that money looked like when a reporter asked him on camera how a man earning $3 an hour on an auto line 6 years earlier had acquired a home in Southfield and a stable of automobiles. Jackson told him it was a matter of record. Holloway carried himself with the same control. He never drank, he never smoked. He laughed at the people who used the product he sold. What he did enjoy was gambling, and he washed money through casinos so aggressively that one year he claimed over $1 million in winnings on his IRS filing. Around 1988, he was walking through Caesar's Palace when he spotted an ordinary middle American woman at a craps table and got a feeling about her. He started laying money behind her. She passed 12 consecutive times, and Holloway walked away close to $1 million richer. He took that streak to Miami to celebrate. Holloway drank nothing stronger than water and juice, so the men entertaining him slipped him a Mickey, and by the time he came around, they had robbed him of somewhere near $400,000 in jewelry. A different man absorbs that loss quietly. Holloway flew home and went to get the Brown brothers, the crew Detroit knew as the best friends, maybe 10 men in total, linked to well over 100 murders, and for a time the most frightening murder-for-hire outfit operating in urban America. He brought them back down to Florida. They scooped up one of the men involved in the setup, and they put him in a basement and asked where the jewelry was. "You're gonna have a real long day, and it may be your last day." Cornered in a room full of homicidal men, the guy started reaching for names, and one of them landed. He said, Huckabuck, a known figure in the streets of Detroit who had worked for Eddie Jackson in the 70s. Holloway asked whether he really knew Huckabuck, then picked up the phone. Huckabuck told them to hold the man until he arrived, flew down, recognized his guy, and staked his own name on him. They let the man go on Huckabuck's word, with the understanding that Huckabuck owed the debt if he ran. He came back with the jewelry. Holloway got his diamonds, the best friends packed up their murder gear, and everybody drove home to Detroit as though none of it had happened. He survived being drugged and stripped in a hostile city on the sheer weight of who he could reach by telephone. The next man built his empire on the same principle, then watched a federal task force take it apart while he sat in a cell. Kenneth Supreme McGriff, $200,000 a day. Kenneth McGriff was born in New York City on September 19, 1959, and by early 1981, he had built something the Queens crack trade would spend 2 decades trying to imitate. He formed his own crack cocaine distribution and manufacturing organization, named it the Supreme Team, and planted it inside the Baisley Park houses in South Jamaica, the same neighborhood that raised him. The organization grew past 100 members, and at its 1987 peak, moved more than $200,000 in crack every single day. The structure underneath that number came from the 5% Nation, whose teachings a group of Baisley Park teenagers had absorbed before they ever touched the scale. Team members ran communications through the Supreme Alphabet and Supreme Mathematics, a working code police could hear and still not understand. That year, the state and the federal government pooled their resources and came for him. McGriff was arrested in 1987, pleaded guilty in 1989 to engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, took 12 years alongside a federal narcotics conspiracy conviction, and walked out on parole in 1995 with his reputation intact. What he wanted next was film. In 1995, he approached Irv Gotti about producing a movie based on Crime Partners, a novel from the Kenyatta series. Parole violations sent him back before the year ended. He served another 2.5 years, and he came home again in 1997. From 1997 to 2003, the organization expanded into wholesale heroin and cocaine and pushed distribution into Maryland and North Carolina, moving over 30 kilograms of heroin, 150 kilograms of cocaine, and 1.5 kilograms of cocaine base. In 1998, he flew to Hollywood to buy the film rights to Donald Goines' Black Gangster, then chased a deal across 5 more years that produced a soundtrack and no movie. The law kept clipping him. In July 2001, police pulled over a white BMW near 145th Street in Harlem and found a loaded weapon and nearly $11,000 in cash, and he pleaded guilty to the gun in September 2002. In 2003, Baltimore jailed him over a parole violation for shooting at a firing range, and he served 37 months. Then came the part that ended him. McGriff was alleged to have had a hand in the 2002 murder of Run DMC's Jam Master Jay, and federal authorities accused him in connection with an attempted murder of 50 Cent, framed as retaliation for the song Ghetto Quran. His reputation pulled the FBI toward the label he had grown close to, and in January 2003, agents raided the Murder Inc. offices while McGriff faced trafficking accusations and others in the building faced money laundering charges. The trial ran until December 2005. On February 1st, 2007, a federal jury in the Eastern District of New York convicted him of murder for hire, finding that he paid $50,000 to have 2 rivals killed in 2001, Big Nose, Troy Singleton, and the rapper Eric E. Moneybags Smith, the second killing in retaliation for the death of his friend Colbert Black Just Johnson. The jury deliberated 5 days. 8 days later, the court sentenced him to life, and he was defended by a court-appointed attorney because the government had already seized nearly everything he owned. He began that sentence at ADX Florence, moved to USP Lee in Virginia in 2011, and as of 2025 sits in USP Beaumont in Jefferson County, Texas. McGriff survived the 1987 case, survived the parole violations, survived a second decade in the wholesale trade, and still landed in the deepest hole the Bureau of Prisons owns. What kept the Supreme Team alive across those years was the man he left in charge. Gerald Prince Miller, the man who robbed his own connect. When McGriff went to jail in 1987, leadership passed to his nephew, Gerald Prince Miller, who solidified his grip by expanding the security force and turning it on 2 groups at once. rivals outside the organization, and members inside it suspected of disloyalty. During 1987 alone, Miller and the then incarcerated McGriff ordered at least 8 homicides. The operation ran on dozens of employees, stacked in deliberate layers so that street-level activity never touched leadership. Miller added armed bodyguards and posted sentinels with two-way radios on rooftops, which meant the team could watch police approach from blocks away and clean a spot before anyone reached the door. He also bought something rarer than muscle. In 1987, the team was allied with Lorenzo "Fat Cat" Nichols, who supplied their powder cocaine, and Nichols, locked up at the time, suspected Henry and Isaac Bolden of robbing his organization and asked Miller to find them. Miller went to 2 corrupt New York State Parole Division employees, parole officer Ina McGriff, no relation to Kenneth, who was supervising Team Security Chief Ernesto Piniela's parole and had become involved with him, and a secretary named Ronnie Younger, who had become involved with Miller. The team paid both for false certifications, identification documents, file information, and ammunition. Piniella and Ina McGriff testified that Miller paid them $3,000 for the Bolden addresses. Handwritten notes recovered in a later raid carried Henry Bolden's Bronx address, where he was shot, and Isaac Bolden's mother's address, near which he was shot and killed. Ina McGriff also handed over paperwork showing that team member James Page was cooperating with authorities, and Kenneth McGriff, freshly arrested on federal charges, ordered Page killed. In late 1987, while Miller sat on state charges, an NYPD and FBI task force executed search warrants across Supreme Team storage locations, drug outlets, and residences, seizing weapons, hardware, documents, and instructional manuals on criminal conduct. McGriff ordered everything shut down. Miller came home in the spring of 1989 and rebuilt it. He reclaimed the 2 most lucrative retail spots, installed Arroyo as second in command and Piniella as head of security. Gross receipts climbed back to $10,000 a day, and by December 1989, the business was running out of an apartment in Baisley Park while the state listened on wiretaps. Then Miller decided he was finished paying his suppliers. In July 1989, according to trial testimony, Miller, Arroyo, Hale, Hunt, and Jimenez robbed 4 Colombian traffickers of their cocaine and murdered them, and the government could never establish more than 2 first names. The bodies were never identified, and the jury found those particular RICO predicate acts unproven beyond a reasonable doubt. The man who had introduced the team to those Colombians, Gus Rivera, became a liability the moment the killings were done, and in August 1989, Arroyo arranged for him to die. Rivera was shot in the head in a Baisley Park courtyard. He lived, he crawled off, and hid from an organization with sentinels on the rooftops and parole officers on the payroll, and he stayed hidden until Arroyo threatened to kill Rivera's girlfriend, Toni McGee, who was a team member herself. She gave up their address, and they tracked him to a South Jamaica motel and finished the job. That same summer, the team stopped buying from Fernando Suarez and Pablo Perlaza and decided to take from them instead. The 2 Colombian suppliers walked into an apartment in Baisley Park in August 1989, were held at gunpoint, bound, and killed, and their bodies were dumped in separate locations across Queens. When Suarez's wife called Arroyo looking for her husband, he told her Suarez never arrived. Killing your connect is a decision with a short shelf life. The next man on this list faced the same pressure and made the opposite choice. He gave the government everything. Alpo Martinez, 30 years on borrowed time. Alberto Geddes Martinez was born in New York City on June 8, 1966, and started selling drugs in East Harlem at 14 years old. By 1985, he had met West Side Harlem dealer Ozzie Faison, and from there he climbed fast enough that within a few years, he stood among the biggest dealers in the city. Harlem eventually got too small. In 1990, Martinez moved to Washington, D.C. to expand, and he pushed into that city's underworld with the same speed he had used uptown, attaching himself to Wayne Silk Perry, a notorious D.C. enforcer who became his bodyguard and hitman. For a stretch, the arrangement worked exactly the way he wanted. New York supply, D.C. distribution, and a man beside him whose reputation settled arguments before they started. On November 7, 1991, agents arrested Martinez in Washington for selling drugs, and the indictment that followed made the drug counts look almost incidental. Prosecutors charged him with conspiracy to commit murder, various drug offenses, and 14 counts of murder. Among the names on that list were Michael Anthony Salters, a D.C. dealer known as Frey, a Brooklyn dealer named Demencio Benson, and Rich Porter, his former friend and drug-dealing partner, the man whose face sat on the same Harlem legend as his own. Facing either the death penalty or life without the possibility of parole, Martinez made the calculation that defined the rest of his life. He turned informant and testified against members of his own organization. His testimony helped bury Wayne Perry, who received 5 consecutive life sentences without parole, and in exchange, the government gave Martinez 35 years. He did not serve them. Martinez was released in 2015 while serving a 25-year sentence at ADX Florence, the federal supermax in Fremont County, Colorado, and the government moved him into witness protection in Lewiston, Maine, where he lived under the name Abraham G. Rodriguez. A Harlem kingpin who once traveled with an enforcer at his shoulder, spent years in a small Maine city, living what the people around him called a surprisingly simple life, waiting on a new identity that never came through. 2 things kept him breathing that long. The first was the deal. The second was distance. As long as he stayed in Lewiston under a name nobody recognized, the men he testified against had nothing to aim at. He gave up the distance. Martinez came back to Harlem, and on the morning of October 31st, 2021, at around 3:30 in the morning, someone shot him 5 times while he sat in his 2017 Ram. He was 55 years old. Shaquem Parker, 30, was arrested in February 2022 and charged with the slaying. A jury acquitted him on July 13, 2024, which leaves the murder of one of the most documented informants in American drug history sitting unsolved. Several outlets reported that Martinez died over a road rage incident rather than over the testimony, a simmering feud about his erratic driving, which would make 30 years of survival end over a traffic dispute a few blocks from where he started. His legend had already outrun him regardless. Cameron played him in Paid in Full in 2002, and rappers from Nas to Jay-Z to Pusha T to Meek Mill have put his name in records for 2 decades. A man who beat 14 murder counts by talking and got memorialized for it anyway. Martinez survived by handing his organization to the government. The next man refused that trade completely, took 33 years for it, and built one of the most valuable brands in American music from inside a maximum security prison. Michael Harry O. Harris, 33 years and a record label. Michael Harris grew up in Los Angeles off Central Avenue in the 40s after starting out on 53rd and Avalon, which meant a junior high move dropped him out of one gang's territory and into another's. He got into the game at 19. The introduction came through a man he grew up with named Charlie Mack, who told him nothing would get him richer quicker than rock cocaine and predicted people would be calling him Rock Mike before it was over. Harris bought a pack, rocked it up, put people around the corner from the ABC market, and by his own count was a millionaire before he turned to 20. What separated him from his peers was everything he did with the money. He stacked it quietly and refused to buy anything until he had $1 million sitting still. His mother ran a cafe and his father owned a lumber company on Alameda, so he had watched business get done up close, and he converted drug proceeds into legitimate structures faster than almost anyone in Los Angeles. Cartier limousine service, contracting and construction companies, real estate, and Beverly Hills leasing, an exotic car lot he was running at 22. He also backed the stage play Checkmates with Denzel Washington and carried it to Broadway. Then the state took all of it. First time they gave me 25 to life plus 3. 6 months later, the federal system added 20 more years, pulling him into a major drug conspiracy he was not part of because his voice appeared on one phone call. He had his own operation, entirely separate from theirs. The other men on that indictment faced life without parole. He spent roughly 23 years in California custody and another 10 or 11 in the federal system. 33 years for a man who had been free for about 7 years in the trade. After the federal sentencing, San Quentin housed him on death row for a few months because officials considered him too high level for general population. He talked to condemned men through the gate and found kids younger than himself waiting to die. That is the experience he credits for his vision. Young men on the street had no idea death row was waiting for them, and somebody needed to tell that story in a form the community would absorb. So he built the vehicle from a cell. Harris created Godfather Entertainment while incarcerated, and when Ron Brown and Eric Willie introduced him to Sujay Knight, he brought Knight in for a sit-down, and the two agreed to partner. The first time Death Row Records appears in any legal document, it appears as a subsidiary of Godfather Entertainment. Harris supplied the legitimate money behind it and ran his end through the infamous phone line at the label that nobody else was permitted to touch. He also got pushed out, which he attributes to the physics of being locked up while other people handle your business. Inside, he took every program available and then started creating his own financial literacy classes and coding classes taught by professionals he arranged to bring in from the Bay Area through the warden. Men left San Quentin with real skills, and some went home earning $200,000 and $300,000 a year, with at least one clearing $500,000. That record is what freed him. Alice Johnson fought for his case. Donald Trump signed a commutation. In the final days of his presidency, Ivanka Trump called his daughter with the news, and Harris walked out of Lompoc after 33 years. He has said the drive down the coast felt like he had gone to the store. He saw Snoop Dogg within hours, and the two of them eventually sat for 5 or 6 hours, planning how to take death row back, which they did. He survived the yard, the sentence, and the system. The next man survived his own words on a federal wiretap. Freeway. Rick Ross. 2 words on a federal tape. At his height between 1984 and 1986, Rick Ross was moving at least $1 million a day, and the first of the month pushed him past $3 million in a single afternoon. The rhythm ran like a payroll cycle. $3 million on the first, 2.5 on the second, $1.5 million on the third, then a steady $1 million a day until the 15th spiked it again. He built that on a foundation nobody would have predicted. Ross could not read. He failed science because he never attended it, sat in special education throwing paper airplanes across the classroom, and had no idea what a gram was or how a triple beam scale worked. The men who supplied him taught him all of it because they needed him sharp so their money moved safely. The discipline came from tennis. Ross made all conference and all city and trained the way serious athletes train, hitting 300 and 400 backhands until the flaw disappeared. When he stopped playing at 18, the only men modeling adulthood in his neighborhood robbed people and sold drugs, so he applied an athlete's work ethic to the one business that would have him. He tried the product exactly once, for about 2 weeks, after his cousins pushed him into it, and when his head cleared, he understood they had done it so they could get high on his supply. He quit that day and never touched cocaine again. What he became addicted to was the selling. That addiction put him in prison. Ross had been out of the trade for 5.5 or 6 years when Danilo Blandon came back around, and Blandon had already become a government informant wearing a wire. Blandon told him he had 700 kilos, and before Ross could think, 2 words came out of his mouth. "I promised myself and my kids I'm never selling coke again." He asked how much. He never took the deal, never bit, and it did not matter. Prosecutors played that tape in the courtroom over and over, and he sat there listening to his own voice convict him with a question. He served 20 years and 3 months. Inside, he learned to read, then read more than 300 books, then taught himself law. His lawyer told him the 3-strike statute applied to his case. Ross read it himself and saw that the law required intervening arrests, 3 separate instances, each following punishment for the last, and argued it and won. The story around him got bigger than his case. When Gary Webb published his investigation in the San Jose Mercury News in 1996, it became one of the first major newspaper stories ever posted to the internet. Printed copies could be recalled and altered. The internet version could not be pulled back. Ross did 6 interviews a day from a jail cell while the CIA and Congress came to see him. He knew Blandon, and he had never heard of the Contras. He came home to nothing, standing in a vacant apartment with his partner and 2 small children until a conversation on a podcast and a stranger on a downtown street turned into a t-shirt reading, "The real Rick Ross is not a rapper." He sold 100 in a day, and when Joe Rogan wore one on the show, the money that landed covered his rent. Almost everything he built afterward got taken again. He put around $115,000 of that shirt money into a documentary about his life, lost control of it in court to the partners who funded the rest, watched it sit on the front page of Netflix for a year, and collected nothing. John Singleton walked the premiere with him and made Snowfall without crediting him. He sued the rapper who took his name, lost on a technicality, and got hit with a judgment for roughly $1 million in legal fees. He kept moving anyway. Ross now owns a legal dispensary, argued in front of a city council that convicted felons should be permitted to work in the industry. Their arrests helped legalize, manages professional boxers, and runs a record label. The last man on this list never had to rebuild because he never let anyone take anything. He simply left. Frank Matthews. Black Caesar walked away from all of it. Frank Larry Matthews was born in Durham, North Carolina on February 13, 1944. His mother died when he was 4. An aunt married to a lieutenant in the Durham Police Department raised him, and he dropped out of school in the 7th grade. At 14, he led a teenage crew stealing chickens off local farms, and when a farmer confronted him, he hit the man with a brick, which earned him a year in a state reformatory. Philadelphia came next, where he wrote numbers until a 1963 arrest pushed him toward Brooklyn. In Bedford-Stuyvesant, he cut hair, collected numbers, and worked as a loan shark, and in 1965 he moved into heroin, where the American Mafia controlled wholesale supply through the French Connection. Matthews approached the Gambino and Bonanno families about a partnership, and both organizations turned him down. So he went around them, reaching Cuban Mafia boss Rolando Lucas Gonzalez Nunez through Harlem numbers operator Spanish Raymond Marquez. Gonzalez sold him his first kilogram of cocaine for $20,000 before fleeing to Venezuela. That single connection turned into a pipeline. Gonzalez sent large loads of cocaine and heroin north out of South America, and within a year, Matthews was a major player in New York. By the early 1970s, his organization handled multi-million-dollar heroin loads, and he personally earned an estimated $10 million in 1972. The DEA concluded that he controlled the cutting, packaging, and sale of heroin in every major East Coast city. He ran 2 fortified mills in Brooklyn, one his people called the Ponderosa and another called the OK Corral, both reinforced with steel and concrete and guarded by men with automatic weapons. He supplied dealers across the coast at up to $26,000 a kilogram and bought a house on Todd Hill, 3 blocks from Gambino boss Paul Castellano. Then he tried to reorganize the American drug economy. In 1971, Matthews invited major African American and Hispanic traffickers from across the country to a meeting in Atlanta to work out how to import heroin without the Mafia in the middle, and the DEA sat outside taking down everyone who walked in. The men inside agreed to break the Mafia's grip on importation and move into cocaine, which was arriving in enormous quantities. The retaliation came from closer to home. On Easter Sunday, 1972, his main Philadelphia dealer, Tyrone Mr. Millionaire Palmer, was killed in a gunfight at an Atlantic City nightclub that left 5 dead and 26 wounded. Nobody was prosecuted, and not one of the 799 potential witnesses came forward. 3 of Matthews' top lieutenants were also murdered by the Black Mafia, and he absorbed all of it and held a second summit that year at the Sands in Las Vegas. The case arrived in pieces. A December 1972 indictment in Brooklyn accused him of attempting to sell 40 pounds of cocaine in Miami, and in January 1973, the DEA arrested him at McCarran International Airport on tax evasion and conspiracy charges. A magistrate set bail at $5 million, the highest figure ever set in this country to that point. He faced 6 counts and 50 years. Out on bail and facing all of that, Matthews got robbed by the Mafia. In April 1973, Ernie Coco Corraluzzo of the Genovese family negotiated the sale of 40 kilograms of heroin for $375,000 at the Waldorf Astoria. Corraluzzo took the money, delivered nothing, and flew to the Bahamas. Matthews' people kidnapped Corraluzzo's bodyguard, and Corraluzzo flew straight back to New York, returned every dollar, and handed over 25 kilograms of heroin on consignment as an apology. That is the last clean picture anyone has of Frank Matthews operating. On July 2nd, 1973, he was scheduled to appear in a Brooklyn courthouse and never showed. He is believed to have taken $20 million and left the country with his girlfriend. The FBI posted the largest reward a federal agency had offered since John Dillinger. Former DEA agent Frank Panessa has said the agency received unconfirmed reports that the Genovese family lured Matthews to the Bahamas and killed him. Nobody ever confirmed it, nobody ever produced a body, and the DEA still ranks him among the top 10 drug traffickers in American history. 53 years later, the file is still open.